Vampire Lesbian Post-Apocalyptic Suicide Pact. Now that I have your attention, let's talk about Vampire in the Garden is not good. So this is another Netflix wit property, and you know how I can tell that? Because it's got 1. A way too fast pacing, 2. Highly underdeveloped world and characters, and 3. Some pretty nice animation. But in all seriousness, I had no idea what was going on in this show when I went into it, and to be honest, I wasted my time watching this. Vampire in the Garden does the usual forbidden relationship trope in a post-apocalyptic tundra vampire world where vampires and humans are in a perpetual state of conflict. This world is barely set up, yet one of the most vital parts of the story is that humans have foregone music and culture because vampires will hear them. And now vampires like music. And the humans lived in a fascist dictatorship run by a military general mom of the main character, Momo, who is a 14-year-old child soldier with a slight interest in music boxes, and a heavily implied friendship with another child soldier. Now let's play Does Lesbian Love Interest Get Fridged? If you answered yes, congratulations, you also saw it coming a mile away. Now, Momo is given a music box by this girl after they commit a war crime, of course, and suddenly she now loves music and has a falling out with her mom in their city during a night raid attacked by vampires, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Vampires are gentrified now, and like music, and have a queen. Her name is Fine. The fact that Fine is a queen literally doesn't matter at all. Okay, it sort of does, but not really. Or the vampire society she's from. All you need to know is that this is Allegra, and that's his pug. So, content warning for this, because as you can tell by my opening statement, there could be something in here that might not be for you if you are sensitive to these type of topics. So, be warned. Fine is also gay. That's not the content warning. She's also suicidal. That is the content warning. But not because she's gay.
Are you sure about that?
Okay, that's not entirely a true statement, but you won't get a verbal confirmation until the last episode anyway, so who cares? Oh, and she's a vegan, and has been slowly killing her for years. Anyway, back to the attack on Central. Momo has a falling out with her military commander mother, flees, a series of plot conveniences happen, and she and Fine meet at their lowest points and decide to flee together after Momo's mother gives the okay to fire upon her while she's in the way of a giant vampire monster because of the mission. And so begins our just really dark and bleak Romeo and Juliet-esque tale about the two trying to find a place where humans and vampires can live in harmony. I will say, before I go any further into the sarcastic criticism, I actually did like episode 2, which gave the most color to their relationship, and I did like one other character in the show, Momo's samurai sword-wielding uncle, who actually has a reasonable backstory and an interesting demeanor about him. He would have been a great point-of-view character to follow in the story about an uncle trying to retrieve his niece from a vampire kidnapping, while he himself has background in having relationships with vampires. But we don't get that kind of nuance, no sir. What we get after episode 2 is more plot contrivance after contrivance, poor and stupid decisions on the part of our main characters, and bleak city after bleak city, and an incredibly worthless finale, in my opinion, that deflated any lingering opinion I had of the show. The problem with Vampire in the Garden can be summarized in nearly every single episode. Actions are taken throughout each episode by our main characters that seem illogical, because there is no basis in their incredibly sparse backstory to justify to us, the audience, our suspension of disbelief, once you put any thought into their actions. Vampires and Central are at war, but also in other places, vampires and humans begrudgingly live next to each other. Momo runs from home after an argument with her mom during a vampire air raid, and while she hears none of the explosions or gunfire around her, Fine happens to both hear and see her humming a song. Fine refuses to drink blood, but also in doing so, essentially abandons Momo in a city full of hungry vampires who will eat her, and in response, Momo breaks into a military facility to steal blood for her, despite the fact that Fine wouldn't even drink Momo's own blood, so there's no reason for her to believe that she would drink any blood at all, and to top it off, she's in a city known for its blood trade, so Momo didn't even really need to break into a military base at all, she could have just stolen it off a junkie. It's these odd decisions and the recklessness of Momo and Fine to throw themselves into pointless danger on the regular, and their pursuers just knowing where they are, for whatever reason, that really keeps me from liking these characters. Not helped by the fact that their backstories are barely touched upon beyond a brief, confusing flash. And the world around them isn't really engaging either. The landscape is pretty, it does a great job, but the nature of the landscape doesn't make a lot of sense to me unless nuclear winter happened. And every single character outside of the main two characters are either comically evil antagonists or just bad people with no character arcs. Even the one vampire human town that seemed to be paradise. These are when they actually commingle and don't live side by side, which we already see. But this paradise town was immediately undercut within the first, 5 minutes by a quick reveal and then a later longer reveal to show that they are utilizing a vampire to power the entire town by plugging it into some sort of old war submarine. And they also try to kill Momo and Fine while laughing maniacally after Fine leaves, but they didn't even discover the plan, and Momo survives a missile strike at near point blank range. Yeah, there's no nuance in this show, not really, and neither is a really interesting world building to go with the visuals. And all the world exposition is quick and clunky and doesn't really make sense. You see what I'm getting at? So let me sum up what pushed me over the edge in the end for Vampire in the Garden, which made me like it less than Bubble and less than some other shows. It's that the entire show has an undertone of, content warning again, suicide. Fine finds Momo after their argument with her mother, essentially wishing to be taken away to be alone somewhere, in the very depressing sense. This doesn't work because we don't really know what music means to Momo beyond the fact that her friend gave her a music box, or her relationship with her mother beyond the maybe 5 minutes we've seen them together. This seems like a crazy emotional state that we can't emphasize with as much because we don't know Momo's breaking points and we don't know what pushed her to this area. We can make assumptions and such, but such a big change that is the inciting incident of the entire story needs more justification. And Fine is also suicidal, slowly dying for years from not drinking blood. Don't ask me why she's still alive, I have no idea. And keeping a special monster drug next to her that the vampires usually use for suicide missions in the war, which we don't actually know where this drug comes from, that she contemplates taking under multiple instances, because it will kill her. And supposedly these two, Momo and Fine, give each other a reason to keep living, and they do have some chemistry together, but Fine is also constantly on the edge of abandoning Momo for her quote-unquote safety, but in doing so, abandons her in places that would likely kill her. And this is cast as some sort of noble sacrifice, but in my perspective, this is Fine looking for just an excuse to justify some sort of noble, bittersweet sacrifice we can all see coming a mile away, and it comes off as hollow. And spoiler alert, that so-called noble sacrifice happens in the last episode when they're cornered by humans that Momo's mother sent to her to retrieve her, wasting tons of military resources on her daughter after she was fine with killing Momo in the crossfire of war, so I don't know why. But what should be noted is that these humans won't kill Momo, they're there to capture her and bring her back alive. But Fine forces Momo to leave their little area, and Fine injects herself with the suicide serum, and at that point I came to the realization that, like some other shows I've seen before, tackling these dark topics but without the knack for it, Vampire in the Garden is misery for misery's sake. There is nothing in this world that appears remotely redeemable. Everyone is against Momo and Fine. Every society wants them dead. Beyond a few montages and certain choice moments, there is not really a break from the misery or the sadness, except when they are alone, and even then, that's not a given, and even when it's with other people, there's the undertone of not that this won't last, but that this is fake. And such a poignant and devastating action as suicide is completely wasted on this show that hasn't earned such a heartbreaking moment. Especially when we could see it coming a mile away, and especially when its justification for all of Fine's actions leading up to that point comes in a 2-minute flashback that we see on her deathbed. Not to mention that there was no reason she couldn't have slipped out with Momo through the passageway they were found, but they wanted a moment where Fine could become a monster and didn't kill someone because I guess that happened in her past, I think? It's unclear because the flashbacks are just not well told. And as Fine lays dying in front of Momo and they reminisce, and Momo also confronts her mom, who I don't care about, and she dies, and that's it. And beyond a little glimpse of the future where Momo makes a paradise that they had dreamed about, but the show doesn't earn that brief future flash. It shows us a bleak, unredeemable present, and then smash cuts us to a more interesting world and doesn't elaborate and expects us to be happy at the end, I guess. And I'm left tired at the end of this, and I'm unhappy, and after having so many emotions attempted to be pulled and twisted out of me, I just didn't feel good. So you know what you do when you don't feel good? I watched Violet Evergarden.
You what?
The most feel-good show you've ever seen. But it was because I wanted to feel why the sadness that was so prevalent in Vampire in the Garden felt so much more real and purposeful in Violet Evergarden, and it was twofold. One was that even though Violet's backstory is rarely shown, it's exuded in her actions, in her speech, in her demeanor, something instantly recognizable and inherently sad. And the second portion is that even though the inevitability of that sadness, the inevitable realization that we believe Violet will come to at some point in the show, that the Major is very likely dead, and it'll be too late for her to tell him she loves him back. And that journey that will get Violet from that point to being able to know and understand what I love you is, will without a doubt change her as a person. And there's also a hint of possibility that she can still find happiness, even amongst the overwhelming promise of sadness that keeps me invested. Vampire never had that promise. Not really. Nor the illusion of that promise as evident when they immediately undercut Paradise the moment it was introduced. It has a sadness and a death for the sake of poignancy for the audience, because there's no foundation for us to figure out what that means for its characters. For Violet, sadness will be becoming human and understanding emotion for the first time in her life. For Fine, sadness is a self-destructive fling disguised as some noble revelation. For Momo, sadness is the music we never really understood why she liked. These sadnesses are not the same. Before I end this review, there's one other sad suicidal vampire I want to touch on. Dracula, from Netflix's Castlevania. In a similar vein as Fine, Dracula's wife is burned at the stake by humans, his one and only love, and that also sends him into a very slow, very methodical, self-destructive spiral. But the difference in his death and in Fine's death was that Fine's death was clumsy. You'd be hard-pressed to justify it beyond some emotional ending, but for Dracula, his death wasn't some long string of coincidences and bad luck. It wasn't simply because the bad guy had to die. His death was his arc, coming to the realization that he, in fact, was already dead. The man his wife knew, the father of his son, didn't exist anymore, and he realizes that as he beats his son to near death in the very room he and his wife built for him. And so, with that somber realization, he stops fighting a fight that he was clearly winning, because he was ashamed at what he'd become. Dracula's death isn't a happy one, it's a somber one. A death that didn't need to happen in the context of the world, not in the context of bad writing or forced stupidity. He should have been a loving husband to a loving wife, a loving father to a loving son. But his past and his world and his response to trauma made his death inevitable and tragic. Because he could have been a good man. He was a good man for a brief but impactful moment, and that good man realized the only way for his son to live and to stop himself from continuing as a monster was to die. That is true meaning and agency behind a character's decision to die, not because it seemed like the right thing to bring out emotion in the story, but because it was the most impactful way for Dracula to conclude his story. The world's longest suicide note. Well, Thank you for watching. This was a hard review to write for a show that's really hard to summarize. No hard feelings if you ended up really liking Vampire in the Garden. It just wasn't for me, and I get more critical for shows punching for having emotional beats if they don't put in the time and effort to earn those beats, but to each their own. If you have a different take on the show, please let me know in the comments below, and if you liked my review, or even if you didn't like my review, feel free to subscribe and criticize me later. I appreciate it. So yeah, thank you so much. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm Locklan, Star Eyes, and I'll see you next time. Bye.